Hello there. It's time for a anime review. I wanted to talk about Mirai of the Future. This is the newest movie by director Mamoru Hosoda, and I had the pleasure of seeing this movie in a actual movie theater. It got a limited North American release. And before I get into the movie itself, let me tell you, it is weird seeing commercial advertisement aimed at fucking otaku culture. It's like all for overseas trips and import proxy buying stuff, and I'm not quite used to it just yet. Anyway, the movie itself follows the exploits of a young boy and his family as they welcome in a new sister named Mirai to the family. Our main character, Kun, is ambiguously a small child, toddler type, and he's just articulate enough to be able to express and act on his feelings of jealousy at his newborn sister, and all the attention that she is getting from his parents. But the twist of the movie is that Kun starts experiencing these sort of hallucinatory moments where he is interacting with past and future versions of his family members. And this happens in sort of a Calvin and Hobbes-esque style, where characters will take on their past or future forms when nobody but Kun is looking. In particular, his baby sister's teenage self emerges several times to lead him through a series of exploits that underline the connection to family and consequence that Kun needs to begin accepting his baby sister. Now, because this movie is centered around family building and children, there definitely is a scent of Japanese breeding propaganda. For the uninitiated, Japan has a deficit of childbirths and nobody knows how to fix it, and they're trying everything they can. All the problems that Kun causes is not encouraging. Another kind of awkward thing that's kind of sidestepped along the way is Kun interacts with his paternal grandfather or great-grandfather, I can't remember offhand, who was in the military during World War II, which for a North American release is gonna always present some problems, but not as many as seeing a teenage girl refer to a toddler as Big Brother, especially in the age of Eromanga Sensei. Continuing on with the review, I'd like to mention that I'm not going to spoil too many elements of the plot, since there isn't much really to spoil. It's a lot of kind of quiet moments. There's a slice of life element for sure, so there's not going to be much for me to really spoil in this review, so much as I want to focus in on the characters and environments that are presented to us. First off, there is the primary protagonist, Kun, who is a very realistically depicted shitty toddler. He throws tantrums, he's unreasonable, he just wants attention, and as long as you can empathize, I guess, from his rather simplistic point of view, that's all fine. It's just there's something inherent to depicting realistically small children that might turn some people off, since he is the point of view character and the only consistent character throughout the whole movie. And unfortunately, from what information is presented to us, it seems like he's going to grow up to be a obnoxious sad boy. Next up, there's the parental figures. The mother and father are both interestingly flawed in ways that are also pretty realistic. Like, not only is Kun a realistically shitty toddler, the parents have a, pretty good dynamic going, where they clearly get their feathers ruffled by each other, but they get over it. It seems like the mother is the breadwinner in the family, so once she starts returning to work, that's when a lot of the problems go on. her husband is really enthusiastically trying to take up the role of stay-at-home dad and to try and balance it with freelance architecture work. But his wife calls him out on being shittier at doing that than he tends to tell the neighbors. In short, they're overworked, sleep-deprived, quite a bit haggard, and really learning their way through the process of being new parents. And that's what I like about them, is that they're learning as much as Kun is throughout this whole movie. Besides these characters, there's also Mirai, who's a newborn, so there's not much characterization to her just yet. Her future self is not exactly Manic Pixie Dream Girl, since she's not a romantic interest, but she's like just pleasant and quirky enough and hung up on silly little adolescent things like whether or not she'll get married sooner rather than later. So there's not much to go off with her, as like she's not built up in the same way that Kun and the parents are. Additionally, there's the family dog, who I think is really just a fun physical character. Again, Calvin and Hobbes vibes coming from him. When he's first introduced, he's kind of a mysterious character, but lets on just enough that Kun, as the observant child, realizes that this is his pet. And all of that mysteriousness comes crumbling down as he plays fetch with this fully grown man. And lastly, there's his grandfather, great-grandfather, the war veteran, who is into maintaining motorcycles as his sort of post-war hobby and profession. He exudes a sort of calm, collected, comfortable ease of things. He's, fairly impressive. We're seeing him really through the eyes that Kun would be seeing him, as this sort of mythical male figure who's largely stripped away from the context of the conflict that he participated in, the same conflict that ended up maiming his leg. He walks with a limp through a lot of this. Since we're seeing this through the vantage point of Kun, a lot of that context is not addressed or just sort of left there as something for the older audience to notice. Next up, I'd like to talk a bit about the visual stylings of this movie, which are usually absolutely phenomenal, but at least the version that I was seeing, some of the CG did not live up to the rest of the quality of the picture. As ever, the goal of CG is to integrate it in ways that are not terribly noticeable. So, for instance, throughout most of the movie, the pet dog is a CG model that they've stylized in a way that's kind of cel-shaded, and he blends in pretty seamlessly. The only way you really notice it is that his movement seems a lot more fluid than the other characters. But there's particularly one scene where Kun is looking out at this sort of psychedelic display of interlocking trains, and it just seemed like some poorly rendered PlayStation 2 graphics. And I don't know if this is just one of those things that's going to get cleaned up for the home video release or whatever, but it looked like jarringly raw compared to everything else in the movie, especially compared to some of the lush environments. There's a couple of times where the courtyard of the family house transforms into like pretty much a straight up forest with like ruins and stuff like that going on in it. And it's phenomenally gorgeous. And then there's just a couple of scenes where the CG looks really flat and unrendered. And at one point, Kun winds up in a big train station hub, and there's a whole bunch of crowd shots. And the flat CG and kind of featureless characters work when we're seeing them from Kun's perspective. He's a toddler, he's really low to the ground. We're not really seeing much of their faces. But some of the other shots where we are a bit higher up just look a lot more awkward for it. Some of the other psychedelic moments feature a completely different animation style spliced in there, kind of like if anyone's seen Madoka Magica, they cut in a lot of experimental animation amongst more traditional anime affair, and that sort of starts happening towards the end of the film, but it works a lot better than the CG because I think it portrays this mood of confused adolescent perspective. Kun is out in unfamiliar territory, alone, and he's not sure what to do, where to turn, or what's going on around him. And so the animation changes to reflect that. Also, I just wanted to note that this movie features some of my favorite architecture porn in any anime. As I mentioned earlier, the father character is a freelance architecture draftsman, and the house is built in a very artsy, impractical sort of way. There's like too many stairs and like tiered areas within the house for me to think that that's realistically something he would have chosen to do, knowing that infants were going to be gracing the house in the near future. Also, the sheer impracticality of having the playroom not connected to the rest of the house and only accessible by crossing the courtyard is also pretty questionable. But hey, the whole place just looks fucking awesome, and I would love to actually have like blueprint layouts of the house's design, because it's so cool to look at. It reminds me of the house from Tenchi Muyo, another anime where one of the family members is an architect. I believe Tenchi's dad is, at least. And so, like, you can get schematics of the house from that show, and very much the house from Mirai is in that same vein, where I'm just like, this is so distinct and so cool and so artsy and so not utilitarian for the needs of this family. But, like, shit, it looks cool. And the opening to the movie actually has, like, the construction process for them remodeling their house in preparation for having kids. So, overall, my thoughts on Mirai were that it was a very well done movie. It picked a thematic element and based sort of a series of less remarkable events around that idea to build a cohesive feeling for the film, which kept it from being a little too quiet, but also, gave it this meandering structure that I think would appeal to a younger audience as well. Like, it's got a very My Neighbor Totoro feel in just how, like, things continue to happen and there's not really a larger grand plot taking place. It's got a lot of feelings to it. The message on family and context is, pretty resonant throughout. I really liked this film, and I hope that the few things that I had to say about the animation at some points being a bit off, I hope that that's just something that's like, the anime industry goes back and fixes things often for the Blu-ray and DVD releases. So we'll see if like those change as, time goes on. But they weren't bad enough to really detract from the film as a whole. I really like this and can't say enough good things about it. Anyway, as ever, thanks for listening to my cruddy opinions, and I hope you go out and see this. It's worth your time.